but at least I'm starting. So jumping right in, I've been mostly just messing around with these new tiles that I made for my desert biomes or planets and some weather, which I can turn off right now, but I'll talk about how I did all those. I've added some textures for, or I guess some tiles for meteors. I want to say I'll call these meteors. It's kind of like a round, rocky, cratered material. Mostly that's all I've added. I'm using the same stones that I'm using everywhere else, and I've made a couple little pyramids. I think I showed some of those in my other videos, but that's not what I want to talk about. I've been working on some weather, and if you didn't know, there's a built-in particle generation system in 001, which you might know, but if you didn't know, you can also use particles on your weather effects, on your rain or on your clouds. So you aren't exactly limited to just rain. So this is my rain particles. I'll show you how I set up the rain. You can't really tell what's going on here. There we go. I've made a few extra things, some ore nodes to make it blend in. There's some terraformation tricks I'll have to go through. It's fairly complicated. The more you add, the more complicated it starts to get, because you have to kind of you have to associate a tile with another, and then you have to associate them with each other, and it starts getting crazy. But usually I can get everything to work together. Like right now I only have terraforms for my meteor with the dirt. It doesn't blend with grass yet. It doesn't blend with the stones yet. It actually overrides everything but the dirt. But that'll let me put, little meteors down. I don't know what kind of material you're going to get from them, but that's an option, I think. I can at least have a couple different materials. So, the rain here, the weather in 001. I haven't gone over much of it. I think I went over it a little bit, but it's a little bit limited. It's built in to the map environment properties, and it's been around a long time. I think it's one of the earlier features in 001, but there's not a whole lot of customization options. The different sliders here will change how much and how fast everything is on screen. So the density amount here, really at higher densities it can start to look crazy. So I keep it, between 0 and 5, or not 0, 1 and 5, 1 and 5, maybe 6 or 7 if it's a really heavy storm or something. You can actually really see a difference when you bump it up a bit. It's actually taking a while to load all those particles, but just that little bit of a difference makes it more rainy. Now, since I'm using particles, it's extra slow, so I don't want to bump it up all the way, but let's say I put it at 16. It's going to take a minute here to load because it's just a bunch of particles. Now that's kind of an absurd amount of rain. There's particles everywhere. You might want this, but the higher it is, the closer to 25. I don't know how long it's going to take to load 25 density. Whoa, it's even lagging while it's... Yeah, that's crazy. That would slow my game down a lot, and it's mostly because it's spawning particles. Down at 5 is much more reasonable. This is still a pretty nice rainstorm, I think. Now, the one thing that's useful, these speed ranges, you can set a range how fast these are moving. I think it's how many pixels per second or something like that. I'm not really sure. I think that's what it is, but I've got it set between 163 and 200, so there's a little bit of variance. Some will move faster than others. There's an opacity variance, and then a size one. I don't really do much with the size. Set it to 1, because I don't want my raindrops being all kinds of sizes. Now, this one is the one that has the most effect. The movement variation changes between whether it's a rain-like movement or a snow-like movement. So the closer it is to the right, to the 10, the more wiggly, and I think it falls in a sine wave kind of shape, I believe. And the closer to this side, the more straight. It actually is angled, I want to say, in the direction of this wind slider. I think if I change the wind this direction, it'll go this way. But that only affects the rain to a certain extent. It'll start falling this way. But once you get past about halfway here, it doesn't blow upwards, unfortunately. So you can't have like a rain blowing upwards. I think it's just this bottom 45 degrees or so, but you can slide it back and forth and change the direction that the rain is blowing. And you can snap this in place by holding down Control or Shift, and either one will work, but you can change that. Then if you move the movement variation slider over this way, it'll fall down and start doing wiggly stuff. This is the snow movement, which doesn't look great with my rain sprites, and you can add a little bit of that in and combine the two. So somewhere in the middle it'll start falling, kind of wiggling, but it starts to rotate. The sprites, I guess, start getting turned and rotated. But I want this map to have rain on it. Then I'll come back over to this map, which I'm doing something completely different with, a desert storm. I'll show you how I made that. For the sprites, though, they're set up. Where's my effect? They're set up as weather sprites. I've given them this name, FX Weather Rain. You don't have to name anything like this, but I want it to rotate graphics with direction. So whichever way it's turning is the way this tail's going to move away from. And I've got it set to be pointed towards the right. So with rotate graphics with direction, we'll get rid of all of your facing frames. And then I've just got this little rain sprite here. I can probably clear out this upper chunk. I don't know why I have that upper chunk, but let's resize canvas only. We'll resize just the canvas. It won't touch your pixels. I don't know why I have all that extra space. I think I had it longer earlier, but I want it to be set to overlay so it's always displayed facing the camera without rotating or anything. And then I've set it to additive. So this is for the particle generation and for the way that it crisscrosses across the map. I want it to blend in and have some transparency. So the additive is like an additive blend mode. It combines the values, so it gives it some transparency as it's moving over everything. But also it's really good for working with particles. That's really tiny. But when it's animated, you can see that the tails fade into each other. It's really teensy because it's a rain sprite. But let's take a look at my particle settings here. I've got it set to the default lifetime. I think that's the default lifetime, 0.3. It might be higher than that, but 0.3. I've set my lifetime to 0.3, and I only want it moving upwards on the y-axis. So negative on the y-axis is up. If I had it positive, it would go the other way, and it would look like it's shooting upwards. But I want it to go negative so that the tail moves upwards as the rain's falling. And then I want my ending opacity over here to be transparent. You can leave it up. It'll look more like a laser beam if you do. I want the tail to fade out so it looks more like a droplet almost. You could actually use a sprite that looks like a droplet if you wanted. I just used a couple colored pixels. I like to just use pixels. And then I've got it set to position relative to source. What this does is it makes it so the particles are always spawning from the sprite that's moving. If you don't, the particles will just kind of stay in place. It starts to look weird. And rotate with direction is turned on, so the same thing happens here where the tail will be facing away from the direction that the particle is moving. So since there's no actual movement in the particle, it's just these little pieces, little blue bits flying up. The actual movement happens in the weather system here, where you pick the particle as your sprite and just set your settings. It will work with almost any type of particle that you have, so keep in mind the bigger it is, the crazier it might lag, because if you have a whole bunch of stuff spawning on screen at once, or if they're big particles, it can bog down your game quite a bit. But now let's take a look at the desert weather I've got going on here. Hold on one second. Got to take a quick pause. I think. I'm working overnight This is how I'm able to do this. I work overnight at a desk, so I'm constantly able to just work on these projects. But well, until I'm interrupted, I think I might have a guest or somebody coming in. But I'm using my sand sprite for this one, but I'm using the clouds instead of the rain and snow, and I'll explain why. The cloud system that's built into 001 is a little bit different from the weather system. I think I showed it in one of my previous videos, and I guess I'm not getting interrupted, but I showed it in one of my previous videos, and all it really does is it scrolls the clouds in the direction of this wind dial here. So it will literally cover your map in cloud sprites, but whatever sprites you use, it'll have tons of them all over the screen. They'll just move in a direction. And you can pick 3 different kinds, so you can have 3 different types of clouds. And as I showed in that video, I can't remember if it was the last one or the one before it, they, even at a low density, they tend to cover up the map heavily, pretty heavily with clouds, and it doesn't always look the greatest. So I wanted to try and do a sandstorm effect here, and this is kind of mostly based on the particle settings, but there's only one layer moving right now, and it looks like they're crisscrossing, and that's just because the speed of the particles is almost equal to the speed of the clouds, and I'll show you what I mean. This is it's a pretty nice looking sandstorm. I think you can adjust some of the values to make it look more and more crazy or not, but I've got the density of my clouds set to 2. If I turn it down a little bit, you can see some of the clouds disappear, or some of the, I guess, specks of sand. Some of them blend in a little bit with the sand color, so it's harder to see, but I think it's a pretty nice little blowy sand effect. And I want my density to be closer to 2. I don't have any size variation. I probably could. I haven't tried. There might not be much of a difference because it's just particles, so yeah, you probably can't see too much with the size variation, but I have no opacity at all. Everything's set to fully opaque, so you can see everything. There's no fade. You can change these, but I don't. And I don't touch the flip horizontally or flip vertically settings because it'll mess with my particles. But the way these particles are set up is slightly different from the rain. Very similar, but slightly different. They're set, they look more like wind blowing, just blasting some sand. So I made a couple different shapes. And to make a new layer like this, you would just click Add Animation, Blank Image, change the number to 1. It's usually defaulting to 8. And I only want it to be 2 by 2, and I only want 1. But you can specify how many images or blank images, and it'll actually create a series of frames. So if you're making animations, you can use that to create a bunch of blank frames to work with. But I only want 1, and that was kind of cool. But really, it's just a single particle that I'm making out of a couple different colors of sand. Sandy brown, and I don't really need that dot, but to show you the other layers, they each have their own particle settings. They're all almost exactly the same with slightly different speeds, and I only want them moving left on the x-axis. I've got them set to a speed of 18. I had to fiddle around. You might have to fiddle around if you're doing this in yours to match the speed of your clouds. Everything's set to position, relative source, no trailing, rotate with direction, and there's some size change so that this tiny particle becomes an even tinier particle before fading out. I don't have it fading out all the way, but it just kind of disappears. Each of these has slightly different settings. This one moves with a range. Instead of 18, it has 16 to 18. This one's 16 to 20. So slightly different range, slightly different lifetime. The lifetime's how long it stays, and it has starting distance of 48 in the X and the Y. So it'll start, X position will start anywhere between like here and here, and then on the Y it'll start anywhere between here and here. So Y position is where it starts, like where the first particle spawns. And then the speed is how fast it is when it first initially starts. And you can change how fast it gets like that's like a speed curve. I'll talk about that in another weather or another particle generation thing. But right now this one's only set to move. They each have their own setting like that, moving to the left, different starting distances, so they all start at slightly different heights and different positions here, and that ends up looking like this blowing dust, pretty much just blowing dust. I've got it set to additive, so it's transparent, and overlay, so it's always facing the camera. And when that's used with the cloud system, they're actually blowing in the direction of the wind, which is going this way. So it's going down slightly southeast, I guess. Kind of medium speed range of 200 to 213. I don't have much speed range. I'm going to increase that a little bit. But the particles are blasting towards the left, so all the ones that are moving down and to the right are actually throwing particles this way, creating this illusion that there's two layers of sand crisscrossing each other, when it's actually just one single particle effect zooming off to the right. So that's a more complex effect. That looks more complex than it is, using less. Instead of having two layers of clouds doing this, you can only use one and have the particles just blowing off to the left. So that's one of the effects I was fiddling with on this one. You can. I need to make a snow effect, which I might as well just try and do now while I'm working with weather. So I'm going to go ahead and copy my rain. Call this one weather snow. I kind of want this one to be slightly smaller. I think I want it to be 3 by 3. We're going to make this one snowy, slightly darker edges. I might make these a little lighter. That's an okay little snowball. I think for now it'll be additive. I don't know if I want it to have any particles going up like this. If anything, it would be much shorter lifetime, so it's much less of a tail. Frequency, I don't need... No, I'll leave it where it is. I don't actually know if I want my snows to have particles. But for now, I'll just leave it kind of like that. Just a little snow. Actually, let me turn off the particles and we'll leave it as this white guy for now. A little white square will suffice. And I just kind of want to duplicate this for now. I'll delete it when I'm done. Snow. It's going to not be great because I would like to do it with a snow tile set, but I don't have one yet. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap this out for my snow, which right now just looks like sort of, I guess that's similar to the Sandstorm. It looks like a bunch of white dots. Now, what I can do here is lower the speed, probably something closer to like 75 to 100 or so. And then you bump up this movement variation slider. It starts to get more waggly and drifty the closer you get to the right. So right now it's a little bit dense. I kind of want less snow, maybe about 2. And I want it to be fully snow style. So it's just going to, drift down the screen. And that's much more what I would expect to see from snow, a snow effect. So that's one of the other built-in movements. Unfortunately, there's not a lot that you can do between those two to make super unique weather types. You can do snow and rain, and you can combine the two styles so you have, you can make things fall sideways. So I would use this kind of movement probably for something like micrometeor showers. They would probably be faster than this, but that's one thing I could think of. And then you can do like fall leaves, or like a sprite that looks like a leaf, and have it falling down the screen. They won't look drifty like spinning like leaves. I believe the movement variation does add a spin to the sprite, so if let's say I'll quickly swap that out for a weather leaf sprite. Let's just draw a quick, easily recognizable, clear this out. I want the direction to be noticeable, so we'll just draw a little leaf sprite. It's not going to look great. Something like that. A little leaf. It's ugly, but I'm pretty sure that the movement variation adds a spin to it, so if you were to use the leaf, they'll just be spinning around in circles. Or some of them will be. Some of them are upside down, some of them are not. It doesn't actually rotate them much. It does seem to flip the direction that they're falling, so it doesn't look great. I think it's because I have them on additive, and even then, for falling leaves, that's a bit much. So turn off my additive. I think I still have particle generation on those guys too, which I don't want. Leaf, no. I just want you to be a leaf, a normal leaf. There we go, little leaves. Goodness, those are hard to see. But yeah, they don't spin, and it's not incredibly useful for windy type effects. The ones that are good for windy type effects are going to be the clouds. I believe I have a cloud layer on right now, but it's really hard to see it. And I wonder if I can put one of my weather effects in there and test it out, because if you use something like the leaf, it's going to be really, really tiny. I'm going to turn off the leaf weather. Yeah, they're incredibly small. They're there, but you can't really see them. Oh, man. Let's kind of just bump it up rather than redoing the sprite. I'll just increase it in the editor there. So now you can see it. And it's transparent because I've got these opacity range really low. But so the rain and snow, they're not great for windy effects, but the cloud system is okay for windy effects, and this isn't amazing to see, you know, a bunch of static leaves just floating across the screen, but you can actually, you know, you can add a rotation to the sprite itself and add variation to the speed. And with just a little bit of work, you can add windy effects rather than these being clouds. You know, let's say I come in, I'm just gonna go to my leaf. This is another useful little trick if you don't know it yet, but we can change our pose length to 4. Just add a quick continue. Just add a quick little rotation animation to it. So we want it, not on this one, we want it to rotate this way as it moves around. So slide this over, each time we'll increase this another 90 degrees. And final frame upwards. Now it'll just, and you can change the speed of that by changing the pose rate here. The frame time is only if you have a multi-frame animation, but the pose rate, that'll add a little bit of spin. Let's make it spin slightly slower. So now when we go back to this, it'll look like a bunch of little spinning flying leaves blowing in the wind, and they all spin at the same speed. So that's what it's good to have this variation here, adding in different sprites so you can have multiple spinning leaves. You could do a random number. I think let me actually try that. That's something I could show, I believe, here with my leaf. Rather than spinning it with this pose, I must reset this to 1. That's one way to do it, I believe. Actually, I don't think the random number one would work with the scripting. It'd have to be a continuous thing. But yeah, you can have spinning leaves. You can have combine that with the rain effect. Let's say I just bring my rain back in here, just to have, and it's set to snow. I don't want it to be set to snow. Back to rain. Now I've got rain and leaves. But of course, it's not the greatest because I just threw in this silly little leaf sprite that I drew, but you get the idea. The rain and snow, things that you want to fall downwards across the screen and such, that'll be your rain and snow, and you can only really change the wiggle there. But for wind effects, sandstorms, blowing leaves, even like cloud layers that like noise clouds across the screen to create dust and everything, you can use that with the cloud layer and create even more weather effects there. So that's just a couple little peeks at the weather system and how that works, and what I've added. I'm gonna get rid of this for now, but what I've added as far as the Sandstorm graphics go, I kind of want to mess with the graphics and tile sets a little bit more. Not something I want to do on this particular stream, but I just wanted to take a peek at some of the weather effects, some of the built-in things that you can do instead of just rain and snow. But under, I haven't set up. And in the original project, there's an event that is actually set up to trigger different types of weather, and I have lightning sound effects and flashing screen stuff, and that's something I want to implement soon as well, creating some weather effects, flashing screens and all that. I'm going to jump off, take a bit of a break for now, but I will be back in just a bit to do some more work, probably with tile sets, and I might even add the lightning flashing weather stuff. So I hope these quick little peeks at the weather system, if you haven't used it much or if you're struggling to come up with new ideas for your own weather, remember you can use particles with the weather system, wind effects with clouds, and all kinds of different falling things with the rain and snow. So I'll catch you guys in just a bit. Thanks for watching.